Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Hypnosis Nerd. I'm Luke Chow.
And I'm Kim Gray.
From the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis in Toronto, Canada. In this episode, we're going to do our very best to provide a thorough answer to the question, does hypnosis work? Or alternatively, it might be phrased as, is hypnosis real? So on its face, the question of does hypnosis work, or will hypnosis work for you, or is this a real thing? It seems simple on its face, but the reason we're dedicating this entire episode to the question is because there is a lot to unpack. First of all, we have to define hypnosis, and then we have to define the word works. So what do you mean by works?
Right.
One analogy that I've been using more and more of is the idea that hypnosis is more analogous to a piano instructor and a student, or a golf coach and a golfer, than it is a surgeon and a patient, or a doctor and a patient taking medication. So many people, they kind of want hypnosis to be a magic pill, so they'll see hypnosis as a thing. Or they want it to be like an operation. They want it to be like a procedure where you are out and unconscious, the practitioner does their thing, and then you come to feeling like a completely different person. And the reality is a lot more complicated than that. If you were to call up your local piano instructor and you ask them the question, does piano instruction work? If you were to ask them, do piano lessons work?
Yep, that sounds a little silly to ask.
It is a little bit silly to ask because when you ask the question, you are denying your own role in your success as a future pianist. Same thing with golf instruction. Same thing with learning any other new skill. I mean, does university work to produce better educated people? I mean, yes, but that's not the whole story. The same professor will test all 30 students who attended the same lectures, who did the same exercises, and the grades range from A+ all the way down to fail, even though the professor teaches the same lessons to everybody.
And you're in the same classroom, hearing the same words.
Same classroom, precisely. So you can't deny your own participation in a process, which is the next point I'm going to get to. Hypnosis is not an it. If you are tempted to think of hypnosis as a thing, something you can touch or feel, you're going to be disappointed. Hypnosis is a process. It's a process of communication where the practitioner, or the hypnotist, or the hypnotherapist is using words or verbal suggestion to affect positively the way that you feel. Now, there is research where you can see that brain wave patterns are different in hypnosis. You can see in brain scans that people's brains change during hypnosis, just like the brain wave patterns change during meditation. I very much see hypnosis as a process of communication. And communication always involves, well, at least two people. Both people have to be engaged in that process of communication for a message to be communicated.
Of course, yeah.
If I'm shouting into an empty room, there is no communication that's happening. If I'm talking to someone and there is a language barrier, then communication will be, I guess it'll be more through voice tone and through body language than through the words that I use. But communication requires two parties both to be involved.
Right. It's
Now,
interactive.
It's interactive, it's participatory. In other videos, I might have covered the idea that when hypnotists use the word unconscious, we're not talking about all of the client being unconscious or asleep or unaware. We're talking about the parts of the client's mind that are outside of conscious awareness. So, for example, the feeling of your feet in your socks or your shoes was unconscious until I brought your attention there. Your memories of your high school graduation were unconscious until I bring your attention there. So when we use the word unconscious, we're not talking about you being out like a light. We're talking about all of the thoughts, the memories, and the experiences that are outside of your current conscious awareness. If you were to call your local piano instructor and ask, are piano lessons going to work for me? I don't want to waste my money. And I don't want to do 10 piano lessons and not be able to learn how to play the piano. Well, I mean, there are a few heuristics that the piano instructor can use. So they might sit down with you for a lesson and see how quickly you take to instruction and how coachable you are, and use that to predict, how better of a player you'll be after 10 lessons. But it's, after the first lesson, it's a best guess at best. And if you, as the student, then don't practice, or if you only try to learn in the lessons, that's maybe like half an hour or 1 hour every week,
Yes.
then you might think that piano lessons don't work, when in fact, even with the best piano instructor, you have to listen, you have to put in time, you have to be coachable, you have to practice.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to beginning hypnotherapy, if you start hypnotherapy with the attitude that you're like a patient on an operating table, or that you're a patient who's going to take a pill, then you're not just disempowering yourself, but you're getting in the way of your own success. The same way a piano student cannot approach piano lessons with the attitude that the maestro's going to put their skill into the student's head automatically. So if you approach hypnosis with the same attitude as an eager piano student who recognizes their role in the process, who's more than willing to learn and to adapt and to follow the tutelage or the guidance of the instructor, then you're much more likely to see results through hypnosis. You have to know how this is going to work for you, or else it might just be words in one ear and out the other. If you believe that you're passive, you might actually just let the words come in one ear and pay little attention to them. So, I very much want to weigh things in people's favor. I don't want people going around saying they tried a session of hypnosis. They tried hypnosis once and it didn't work for them. There are some people who are harder to hypnotize. I'll make the points later on that the question is incomplete in the sense that, if you ask, does hypnosis work for most people after one session, the answer is different from does hypnosis work for people after 5 sessions.
Of course.
So
Absolutely.
there are many variables involved. That's why it's not a simple yes/no answer. That's why this episode is completely dedicated to the question of, does hypnosis work, or is hypnosis real? Is it a thing?
Of course. I think another important factor to consider is also how much the client wants to change, just like how much or how badly someone would want to learn a musical instrument. It's if you just show up and you go to the lessons, if you're not engaged with the instructor, if you don't want to learn the skill or to better your life in that department, I suppose, you're not going to experience benefits if your heart's not in it.
Absolutely. And this is good news. This is news that should empower you as someone who could be looking at personal change or hypnosis. Usually by the time someone has decided to do a session with me, first they've decided they want to change. Then they've decided that hypnosis is the best way to go about it. And then they choose me as a practitioner as opposed to other practitioners in the area. It's only after going through those hurdles or barriers that someone actually ends up in my office. So I'm going to address the idea that hypnosis is an it, because in the related discipline of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, there is the concept of a nominalization, and I think it might draw from linguistics, where they also use this term, where a process has been frozen or solidified as a thing or as an it. So I'll use an example, because we were just talking about this before we turned on the cameras, but a relationship is not a thing that you can see or touch. The NLP standard is, can you put in a wheelbarrow? You can't put a relationship in a wheelbarrow. It's not a thing, and yet in language, in the English language at least, we talk about it like a thing that can be fixed, a thing that can be examined. But the thing is very abstract.
Yes.
It's not something in the world out here. It's only something inside people's minds. And the NLP perspective is that if someone talks about how their relationship is broken or if they need to fix their relationship, it's more fruitful to look at what you can see or hear. So what you say, the words coming out of your mouth to your partner, the way you react to what they say, the things you do with them,
Yep.
the things you can see and touch and hear
Yeah.
are the things that make up the abstract concept of a
Right.
relationship.
The tangible
The
things.
tangible things are more fruitful to look at. So when it comes to hypnosis, often there's just so much complexity that gets summed up in the word hypnosis, which in itself is poorly understood by the public. And, so if someone asks me, can I hypnotize them? I might say, well, the honest answer is maybe. I don't know. But if I were to say yes, I can hypnotize you, they might be expecting to be put out like they're under an anesthetic. When in reality, I see it as a communication process where I'm guiding the client's thoughts and imagination in a different or better direction. So even in that exchange of, can you hypnotize me? And yes, there can be miscommunication, even though we're using the same language. The main point I want to make is that hypnosis is a process of communication where the practitioner is using their words to help the client enter a more suggestible state of mind. Usually it's going to be a more relaxed state of mind, and a state of mind where it's easier for them to take on new ideas and new attitudes, which is eventually what's going to cause long-term change. It's not just being hypnotized that causes long-term change. It's being hypnotized to open your mind so that you can accept different ways of thinking, different beliefs, perspectives, or attitudes, and it's your internalization of healthier attitudes that's going to cause long-term change, not just simply being hypnotized.
Absolutely. And I also feel like some clients, if they have more reasons to keep their fears, for example, if it's a phobia they want to address, opposed to when you're giving them suggestions, even if they're positive and they might be resonating, but if they have more reasons to hang on to the phobia, then those positive suggestions that you're giving the client are not necessarily going to stick with them.
Yep. So that's called secondary gain.
Oh.
And one example is that if someone's agoraphobia keeps them on disability, then that's a disincentive to overcome their agoraphobia, where once they can leave their home, they can't get disability and they will have to work.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm not blaming people who have agoraphobia or who are on disability, because this is an unconscious process almost all of the time. But it's a very common unconscious process where if you're benefiting from a problem, it's going to be harder to give up that problem. If we were to apply the same heuristic or test to hypnosis of can you put it in a wheelbarrow, then no, you cannot put hypnosis in a wheelbarrow. It's an abstract concept, and it's not a tangible thing that you can see or touch or feel. What you can see or touch or feel, well, usually it's here, is the hypnotist's speech. You can also see the client's reactions to the speech, some of which are nonverbal, and some of which might be explicitly verbal. So it is the speaking of words and the listening to and acceptance of the messages contained in the words that forms the essence of hypnosis. Sometimes I'll summarize, for skeptics especially, how hypnosis works as you have the power to open your mind when you choose to, and also people can speak in ways that are more persuasive, that are that stay with you longer. And when you open your mind and someone is speaking well to you, better ideas that make more sense than ideas that you want to overcome, then that's all you need to accept or believe in to understand how hypnosis works. So those are things we could see. You can see or hear the hypnotist's speech. You can see or hear the client responding. It should never be a question, really, of is it really working for you? Because if you're questioning it, probably it's not. Although, on the other hand, people do tend to view the past through the lens of the present, where if you're in a better mood today, it's easier to remember the happier events of your past and harder to access the more difficult or more depressing events of the past. Whereas if you're depressed today, and I use the term non-clinically here. If you're sad today, then it's just easier to access the sad memories, and it's harder to access happier memories
Right. Of
when
course.
you're sad.
Right.
I definitely want to, or endeavor to, have the client themselves notice a change that is unquestionable within the first few sessions as a standard for this working for that client. I've talked about how hypnosis is not a thing or an it. It's not like a pill. It's not like a surgical procedure that you can see. It is instead a process of communication that primarily happens inside the client's head.
Yes, you have to be an active participant.
Exactly. If a client actually falls asleep during a session, so if I notice that they're snoring, if I notice that I made an emotional point and they're not reacting non-verbally the way they normally would, then I'll check a few times by asking them to lift a finger. If the finger doesn't go up, then they probably actually fell asleep, and then I have to wake them up and put them back into hypnosis. Hypnosis is not sleep.
Right.
Hypnosis is, well, the best description of it is if there's full wakefulness up here and there's full sleep down here, hypnosis is a state in between. So if someone actually falls asleep, they're not listening to a suggestion to lift a finger. They're also not listening to suggestions for whatever reason brought them there. That's why I wake them up and bring them back into hypnosis. So yes, I want to validate the idea that the client should be aware enough to be listening to what is being said during sessions, because it's a process of communication. Once you remove the idea that hypnosis is an it, and you buy into the idea that it's communication between two people, usually it's just two people, then you can understand how some people are better communicators. And if you were to look for tools or training or skills anywhere, it is in the communication. And communication, in many ways, is an expression of one's thinking. If there's one thing I want to do with all of these podcasts and episodes, it's to explain more of the thinking behind how people achieve change through hypnosis. I am very much in the business of creating and disseminating better thinking. So the hypnotist's role, in short, is to be an effective communicator, to communicate within the scope and bounds of each session better thinking to the client, who the hypnotist has first put into hypnosis, which is a state of mind which allows the client to accept ideas more readily without criticism, analysis, or judgment. So that's the hypnotist's role. They're part of the process. Again, there is no it that's in between. So the client's role is to follow the guidance of the hypnotist, to keep an open mind, to suspend analysis and disbelief as much as they can, and to let the hypnotist's words affect the way that they feel. So that's the fundamental communication that's happening in a hypnosis session. There is no it. Hypnosis is not outside of human minds. It is the practitioner speaking well, using the tools that they're trained in, communicating good ideas, better ideas that will help the client in their problem. And it's the client listening carefully, first to open their minds more and more, to let go of their usual modes of critical analytical thinking more and more, and then to be accepting and absorbing what the practitioner is saying and letting the practitioner affect the way that they feel about whatever the issues are that they're there for. Earlier I talked about how sometimes, something like a sniffle or misuse of a word might cause the client to break rapport or stop listening. Well, at the same time, when the client is engaged in the session, when they basically trust you, if you do make some mistakes or can't find the right words, sometimes they get the message anyway, because that's what human beings do. Communication is never precise the way that mathematics or engineering is precise, the way that computer programming is precise. I think that one false analogy that's not often recognized as a false analogy is the idea that the human brain is like a computer and our memory is like a hard drive and our stream of consciousness is like a CPU and so on. We only came up with that analogy because we live in a digital age. 100 or 150 years ago, in the age of the steam engine, people thought of the mind as almost like a steam engine where pressure builds up and they have to vent it out. They have to blow off steam.
I like that one better.
Well, it's all analogies. The human mind is the human mind.
Right.
And each of these analogies describes a facet of it, but never the whole thing. When people use the word hypnosis, sometimes they're referring to the whole practice of hypnotism or hypnotherapy. In other cases, they're talking about the state of mind that the client is in such that they have suspended disbelief or that they've suspended analytical thinking. So I kind of use the word in both senses. And I use the word hypnosis in the first sense sort of colloquially because people will use the word hypnosis to describe the whole practice. Technically, you could say it's hypnotism or hypnotherapy or consulting hypnotism, whereas hypnosis very technically refers to the state of mind the client's in. And a state of mind is a subjective experience.
Yes.
So asking whether hypnosis is real is a little bit like asking whether love is real. Some people have experienced it, and they say, yes, absolutely, it's real, but you can't see it. You can see only the outside manifestations of someone who's in that state. Other people who might be more cynical will say, no, love does not exist. It does not real. There's just payoffs or transactions or you rub my back, I rub yours, or so on. So, that's like everyone thinks about love. Everyone wants love. And yet, when I painted a picture of the cynic, you can imagine how someone just might not believe in love and also then deprive themselves of the experience of feeling that feeling. Hypnosis is somewhat similar because it's a subjective state of mind. You might also say happiness is another analogy in that it's going to be defined differently by everybody, and it's a subjective experience that we just put a word on. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this in other episodes, but just to recap a definition of hypnosis, it's a state of mind where the client's suspending analytical thinking in order to accept new ideas that are suggested by the hypnotist or the practitioner. So I hope this part of the episode clarifies why hypnosis is not a thing. It's not an it. Instead, it's a process of communication by a hypnotist who's doing their very best to communicate effectively and clearly, and a client who's doing what they can do to keep their minds open, to keep judgment suspended, so that they can be positively affected by what the practitioner is saying.
Right.
If anything's an it, it's the very vague, nebulous state of mind that the client is in. Again, we can only just see the outside signs, so we'll see the relaxation. We'll also be able to suggest things that the client normally wouldn't accept to see if the client takes those suggestions, but those are just the outward manifestations. What's more important is the client's subjective experience. And that's why hypnosis is not so easy to define as a thing or an it or something that's real in the sense that it's tangible. If a client's starting off skeptical, but they're willing to buy into the idea that human communication is one of the ways how we get better, good communication, communicating better thinking and better ideas will make people happier if they can buy into that idea.
Yeah, you have to work on being more open-minded too.
Yep.
I think to a degree you can change that, and if you become more open-minded, then you would be more suggestible.
Yep.
Right.
There's a direct correlation. Actors are the most suggestible occupational group. I have found this consistently,
Right.
where actors are used to being directed by someone else. They're also used to feeling different emotions. They're used to abandoning their usual ways of thinking to be in an entirely fictitious character's headspace. They're used to the many skills that are involved in adopting new attitudes or perspectives when it comes to the issues people see hypnotherapists for.
Right.
So almost universally, well-trained actors are the easiest people to hypnotize. They have the most profound experiences, and they make the fastest changes.
Right.
And just to give you an example on the opposite side of the suggestibility spectrum, if I were to occupationally stereotype, computer programmers tend to be harder to hypnotize. Now, many creative programmers do see themselves as creatives, and if you do, then you're more likely, I think, to be more suggestible. But people who have a hard time letting go of logical, rational, analytical thinking are the people who are going to have the hardest time with hypnosis, because the analytical thinking will block my words from being seriously considered. Instead, it's just processed up here rather than actually felt or experienced.
Right.
And I want the client in such a state of mind that when I speak, there are few barriers in the way, and my words can then affect the client for the better. And it's not just me wanting it, it's also the client wanting it too.
I think that's interesting. I was just also thinking, just going back to when you were talking about actors and how they're more easily suggestible. Would you say people that get easily wrapped up in watching movies are also people that would be likely suggestible?
Yes. So if you want to sort of self-assess how suggestible you are, with questions like, do you tend to get emotional during movies? Here, I'll just think of a few off the top of my head. One, do you tend to get emotional when you watch movies? Because if you do, you are letting someone else's communication affect your feelings.
Right.
Which is the fundamental communication happening during a hypnosis session. And film goers will even use the phrase suspension of disbelief as an important part of the moviegoer's experience of watching a movie. Another question I might ask to ballpark someone's suggestibility is, do you daydream easily? Do you tend to get lost in your own fantasy worlds? Because if you daydream easily, then you're also likely to be suggestible and easily have your mind go to new places or different places. One common misconception that many people have about hypnosis is that it's being hypnotized that causes change. And that's not the case. It's, just to call back to an earlier analogy, it's like being in love leads to an ideal relationship. And, well, that's not the whole picture. So with hypnosis, being hypnotized is the part that allows you to open your mind, to be more suggestible. But someone who's in hypnosis is never completely suggestible. They're just more suggestible. And I think the fallacy is some people think that someone who's in hypnosis becomes completely suggestible, which means anything said by the hypnotist is going to stick 100%. And that's never the case.
Of course, yeah.
More typically, some of what is suggested will stick with the client, and other points will need reiteration in future sessions. So the hypnosis part is just what gets the door open. More important is the messaging communicated during hypnosis. The messaging, if it's a good message and it's conveyed well, makes the client being in hypnosis less important. I mean, people will go to conferences, or they'll go to sermons, or they'll watch documentaries, and the messages can change their thinking for the rest of their life without any formal state of hypnosis at all. So I do care very much about the message, and I see hypnosis as sort of an amplifier, sort of an accelerant. When I'm talking to a skeptical or a scientifically trained client or potential client, and they ask the question of, does it work, or is it going to work? Sometimes I'll refer them to PubMed. And PubMed is an online database of scholarly, specifically in the medical sciences and the health sciences, scholarly articles, papers, publications. So anyone who works in medical sciences or anyone who works in biology will be familiar with PubMed. So I'll tell them, go to PubMed and type in hypnotherapy. Now, what you'll find there, the last time I typed hypnotherapy into PubMed, there were 14,000 papers and journal articles. So there is a body of research there, and the topic of how you empirically measure a subjective experience, that will leave to future sessions. But the scientists, the researchers, they do their best to design good research methodology and then study this experience and also the way that people react to hypnosis afterward. And what you'll find when you search PubMed is that it's always hypnosis for an issue. It's hypnosis for pain management. It's hypnosis for dental applications or gagging. It's hypnosis for IBS. So it's never just a research paper about is hypnosis real. I mean, there might be a smaller number of papers investigating hypnosis as a phenomenon through brain imaging, for example, or EEGs. But the bulk of the research is hypnosis applied to a problem. So when you look at the research, what I'm saying is that the measured success rates will be different depending on the issue being studied. So if someone calls me up and they ask, does hypnosis work for HIV infection? No, it doesn't. We got that question once, and that's an unequivocal no. They need just antiretrovirals.
Yes.
But if they ask, well, will hypnosis work to help me relax? That's almost always an unqualified yes, because almost all of our clients, you've seen them come in and come out. It's like coming out of a massage. So that we can say is yes. And with other questions like, will hypnosis help me stop smoking or lose weight or overcome this fear? Well, there are many variables and factors, but the success rates, depending on the research methodology and the sample size and so on, will vary. It's never 0% or 100%. It's always some number. It's always some number in between.
Right.
It is an interesting enough subject for research that, like I said, there's 14,000 plus papers and articles in PubMed. So there's something to it. But I mean, when people ask, does hypnosis work? One question I have to ask back is, for what?
Of course,
because there are some issues for which it's obviously yes or obviously no, and everything else is, well, it depends. Speaking from my own experience, I believe that one rough heuristic for guessing as to whether hypnosis can help with any particular issue is, can the client be helped by a change in attitude? There are some issues for which a change in attitude or perspective is enough to help the client overcome the problem. There are many other issues for which a change in attitude or perspective is not enough. There are other issues yet where a change in attitude or perspective can help the client but not actually treat the underlying disease or disorder. Let's say that somebody comes to us and they are overusing cigarettes or alcohol, and they're using alcohol or cigarettes to deal with workplace stress. Many people do that. They'll stress themselves out at work. They'll try to decompress at home through the shortest route possible. And one attitude I might introduce for that case, just to use an example, is that their employer is not paying for years to be taken off the end of their life. Their employer is paying them until 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. Their employer is absolutely not paying them to have years taken off of their retirement at the end of their life. Their employer's not paying for them to leave their children 10 or 15 years early. Their employer is not paying them for any of that.
Right.
And they're not going to get this message from their employer. That's why they have to
not.
hire someone like me to
Right.
give them these kinds of perspectives. So that's a change in attitude about work-life balance. It's a reframe, to use a more technical word. And it's one that, when fully accepted and adopted, will help the client stop smoking cigarettes or opening a
course.
bottle of wine
Yeah.
after a stressful day at work.
And that's definitely a universal truth, but it doesn't so easily come to mind, especially when you're engaging in those activities, drinking or smoking to relax. It just, you wouldn't think of that because you're just enjoying yourself in the moment, unwinding.
People don't really pull you aside
Yeah.
and say, here's how to be an adult. Here are the healthy coping mechanisms, which is sort of where professionals come into play. This is also where books and other YouTube videos and so on come into play, where there's no shame in learning as an adult what was not taught to you when you were a child, like how to achieve better work-life balance. But that's where professionals come in.
Of course, yeah.
So I gave an example of where an attitude change will help the client. Now I'll give you an example of where an attitude change will probably not help the client. Someone who's clinically depressed has a hard time hearing the positive messages. They definitely don't believe in the positive messages. It's an issue that tends to require medication or therapy, and positive messaging is not enough. And that's for a severe depression, something passing a clinical threshold. Whereas someone who's going through a breakup, some positive words might be enough to help them feel significantly better. So the analogy that I'll use is that if a client's fallen into a ditch so deep that they need a ladder to get out of it, if they actually need an outside tool to get out of that ditch, then hypnosis itself is not enough. If they've fallen into a ditch that's shallow and they're kind of embarrassed, or their face is in the mud, and some words of encouragement, some praise, some positivity, some positive sentiments are enough for them to get up on their own 2 feet, on their own accord, hypnosis can probably help. So that analogy, the ditch analogy, I mean, I made it up just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
but
paints a good vivid picture, though. It really does.
It paints a vivid picture. I think it should help people better distinguish between what hypnosis is likely to help with versus what hypnosis is likely not to help with. One other very general rule that I've noticed over my career is that it is easier to stop a habit or to change a habit than it is to start a new one.
I find that one interesting.
Well,
I thought it was the opposite.
No, here's why it is. Let's say you want to stop smoking cigarettes. You just have to not go to the convenience store, not bum cigarettes off of your friend, and by default, you're a non-smoker. Right? The human body does not need nicotine to live.
That's true.
It needs clean air. It needs food and water. It even needs love, warmth, shelter, privacy. But it doesn't need nicotine.
Right.
So by default, people are non-smokers. When they don't do anything to go out of their way and start smoking, they are non-smokers. That's the default.
Right.
If people come to me for motivation or to overcome procrastination, I'm less likely to be able to help them than if they want to stop any particular habit. Because by default, if they stay in bed, they won't be doing the habit.
So it's just the absence of doing something. It's easier than doing something, really.
Exactly.
I was thinking of it from a more psychological perspective, where once you get addicted to smoking cigarettes, I mean, you have that craving for the nicotine. Your mind does crave it, right? In that sense. Yeah.
Our luckiest clients are suggestible enough, and I guess at the right stage in their life, plus maybe I'm having a really good day and hitting the nail on the head every time, they're lucky enough that there are no cravings. I mean, I think I've talked about this in other episodes, but I somewhat challenge the addiction model because I believe it's disempowering to believe that you're out of control of the habit.
I agree.
And I believe that because I'm interested in helpful messaging, empowering, beneficial messaging, I would rather give the message that a person is empowered to avert the convenience store and to stay smoke-free, which is the default for a human being. So on the topic of it depends, the complexity of the case, as well as the client's suggestibility, will affect how likely hypnosis is to work for a particular client. And I frame things in terms of probabilities because we don't know until we try, but people want me to guess before they try. So usually I just make the best prediction that I can. And the two components to the prediction are, one, how suggestible the client is. So that is affected by, like I said, occupations tend to train people to be critical thinkers, or they train people to take on new perspectives more readily. So that actually has an effect on how suggestible a person is. Someone's open-mindedness, someone's openness to experience, someone's ability to relax, someone being healthy enough that they're not, for example, in chronic pain, that they don't have a condition that distracts them all the time. These are all factors out of our control, and that we, unless the client tells us, that we don't even know about, that will affect the client's suggestibility. So if you have done an online suggestibility assessment and it ranks you or rates you as low in suggestibility, don't worry about it too much. It's not your fault. And it is possible to increase your suggestibility over time, because going into hypnosis is kind of like practicing yoga, in that the first time you do it, you're not quite so good at it. The second time, you're less awkward. The fifth and the 10th time, you just get better and better at it.
You can familiarize yourself with it and feel more comfortable.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yes. Yep. And there is such a thing as fit as well between a client and a practitioner.
For sure.
Sometimes the fit has to do with gender. Sometimes the fit has to do with the practitioner having a voice that you just really like. Sometimes fit has to do with shared values or beliefs. So there is such a thing as fit, where one client and one practitioner can communicate better together than with other people. So there is no such thing as the best hypnotist for everybody.
Of course.
Because for all my clients who may have experienced trauma with men, they just won't be able to let their guard down as much as with a female practitioner. And that's not their fault. That's not my fault. That just is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although I do my best to be friendly. One other depends is how complex the case is, how long the client's had the problem, for example, whether they've tried to overcome the problem through other means and have now developed the belief that it's a for-life problem. These unknown factors will come into play when it comes to how much the client is receiving and accepting and believing in the message that I'm communicating. And finally, one other it depends is something else that's out of my control as a practitioner, which is how many sessions the client is willing to experience. If the client wants to judge after the first session whether or not it's working for them, then the success rate's going to be lower than if if we have a group of clients who wait until after the third session before judging if it's working. Sometimes the first session, the client's just getting comfortable with me. They're getting comfortable with the process. They're having their questions of, are they doing this hypnosis thing right? Are they doing it right? Am I trustworthy? Am I someone they can listen to? These questions get answered in a first session, so that they're out of the way for session 2, where they can actually listen to the message, where it's the medium that has been settled and the message now comes to the fore. So if you delay judgment until after the first couple of sessions, you'll see a higher success rate than after the first session. If you have clients willing to come for 10 sessions or 12 sessions, I'd be shocked if the success rate is under 80%. Because with more time, there's just like you don't have to guess as much. The practitioner doesn't have to guess as much. We have more real world feedback. There's more time for a message to sink in. There's more time for a message to be reiterated. With more sessions, the chances of success go up. So when it comes to answering the question of does it work, you can see now why it's not a simple yes or no answer, but it's a huge it depends. But when you understand that it's fundamentally communication between two people, it's not an it's not a drug, it's not, you might not even be able to describe it as a tool because it's not tangible. You can't see it.
Not it's concrete,
no, it's a subjective
abstract
experience. Then you can also, I guess, better self-assess whether or not you think hypnosis is for you. So we're not magicians. I wish I could say we're magicians. The reason we have this series is to make good on our slogan or motto that we make hypnosis make sense. I believe the more people understand hypnosis and the more people are not afraid of hypnosis, and the more people understand that it can be sensible, the more people will be doing it, and then the more people will benefit.